Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a review, finally, of No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This is a book I read quite a few months ago. For some reason I didn't do my review though. I think, to be honest with you, it's because I needed to be in the right headspace to film this review because this is a very dark book. And I've kind of been finally ready to sit down and talk about it. I have mentioned it in a few of my other videos, but I did want to do a dedicated review of this book because I think it is just quite something. I think it's one of the most intimate books I've ever read. No Longer Human is a modern classic of Japanese literature. It is one of the most searing examinations of alienation, shame, and identity I have ever read. So let's jump into a quick summary of what this book is about. No Longer Human follows a character who goes by the name of Oba Yotso, and he is a young man who's convinced from childhood that he's fundamentally different and unable to be human. Through 3 notebooks that he leaves behind, we see his attempts to fit into society, but whether it's by clowning around, indulging in drink and women, and also sinking into addiction, but he has the crushing realization that he cannot escape his inner void. This is a confessional. It is like you're seeing a person melt down in real time, and it is deeply impactful. Like, if you have a soul, this book will do something to you. So let's talk about what I loved about this book, and then I'll move more into themes. I think the thing that really sets Dazai apart in general, because I've read a few of his books now, is his absolutely kind of brutal honesty. He pulls absolutely zero punches in depicting Yotso's self-loathing and despair, but there is a beauty to his prose. So I'll just give you an example. There's one line where he says, "I thought that my disqualification as a human being was soon to be revealed to the world." There's a poetic nature to it that kind of stops you in your tracks and has you highlighting or tabbing every single page. Even though you feel this pain that the character is going through, you can't help but look away, either because you feel some degree of kinship to this character, or if you can't even relate to him, you feel some sort of thankfulness, some sort of, you feel grateful that this person has opened up their kind of heart to you in such a raw way, dissecting the parts of ourselves that we all are guilty of hiding at one point or another. The writing is very simple, it's very effective, and with this sort of subject matter, you don't need to be overly flowery to get the point across. In fact, simplicity is much more effective because he's not focusing on evoking certain imagery. It's just about getting this character's thoughts across in a way that feels very raw and very human. Before we get into the themes more, and I also do want to talk a little bit more about Dazai as a person, I want to unpack Yotso a little bit more because his inner life is really the core of the novel's power. It's interesting to see this character kind of evolve and kind of walk us through how he's felt since he was a child. As an example, I don't want to go too deep into spoilers, but to be honest with you, this is the sort of book that even if I did spoil it, it's not about knowing what happens that is the reason why you should be reading the book. It's because of how he approaches the thematic work and the intimacy by which we hear the struggles from the character directly, right? So as an example, from his earliest school days, Yotso discovers that the only way he can feel safe is by making other people laugh. So he actually talks about how he adopted the guise of a clown so that he felt secure. It's interesting because the adoption of this clown persona isn't for applause, it's a survival tactic. He believes that if he can keep everyone distracted by his antics, no one will look too closely at how empty he feels inside. Like, can you imagine what that feels like? Can you imagine what that feels like? It is absolutely heartbreaking. He also has a stutter, which symbolizes the gulf between, thought and expression. And he's convinced that language itself betrays him. And so much of the novel tracks his terror of being found out as a fraud. He even confesses to us that he loathed the sound of his own voice. So he's got this kind of self-consciousness that forces him deeper into isolation, and he just cannot connect honestly. So he hides behind, you know, alcohol, women, and lies. One other aspect that I'll talk about, that there's so many aspects to this book that we could talk about, but I could do a full analysis on that, like a good 1 hour video, but for the sake of time, there's a lot around like shame, guilt, and the unforgivable self as well. So like every transgression, every lie, every moment of weakness feeds into the sense that he is irredeemable. He even goes as far as to say that he is a diseased human, convinced that there is no cure, which is just utterly heartbreaking. But what's interesting is that the act of writing these notebooks is itself a plea, a hope that someone somewhere might actually understand his struggles and what he's going through. And that contradiction, you know, despair laced with an extremely faint glimmer of connection, is the tragic beauty of this character. So this now brings me on to core themes. And one of the core themes of this book is naturally around alienation and kind of performatively, as I mentioned, Yotsu's clownish behaviour is really just armour. He becomes a caricature to avoid real connection. There's a lot around self-destruction and addiction. His spiral through alcohol and morphine feels like a completely desperate grasp for control in a life he perceives as unmanageable. And then there is a lot around identity and shame, where what happens when you believe you're born without the capacity for humanity? Like, what does that actually do to a person? All of these, you know, they cut to the heart of modern existence, especially for anybody who has ever felt like an outsider. And I'm sure we've all felt that to some capacity. I want to talk more a little bit now about Dazai, because he lived a very interesting life, died and he passed away in a very tragic way. The line between Dazai and Yotsu is, you know, it's very thin, it's razor thin. Dazai was born Shuji Tsushima in the early 20th century, and he was an heir to a wealthy landowning family in this kind of city in Japan. Despite being born into privilege, he struggled with depression and a sense of futility throughout his entire life, and he survived multiple suicide attempts, often as double with romantic partners. And in 1938, just 3 years after No Longer Human was published, Dazai and his lover Tomi Yamazaki drowned themselves in the Tamagawa Canal, and he was only 38 years old. Only 38 years old. When you look at this, you know, final act of his, I think it really cements the novel's power. You know, it's both a confession and tragically a prelude to the author's own end. And I think his real life despair gives the novel its haunting authenticity. And I think that's why this book feels so heartbreaking, because when you look at it in the context of Dazai's own life, Yotsu isn't just a character that he made up. In a way, it is him. And their struggles are shared. And you can feel his heart bleeding onto the pages. It's very, very emotional. Just to further this point a little bit more, Yotsu writes a lot about the lure of self-annihilation, and you can't help but feel that Dazai kind of was reaching through his fiction, trying to map out and understand potentially his own demons. In a way, it kind of reads like a final letter, pleading for empathy, even as he himself is pushing away from the very things that make us human. I want to read a couple of quotes now, because again, it's such a small book and you can read it in one sitting, but it's just so impactful and there's so many incredible quotes from this book. So here's a couple. What I have lost in this world is exactly what I once prized most: the ability to express gratitude. Another one. I wondered whether my primal self, buried deep in my subconscious, had not already decided to go on living, and my will had followed its lead. And then last one for now. To live is to be unable to abandon the self, yet to see how little self you have. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave it there, folks. This is a book that I think timing is really important when you read this one. Not one that I'd necessarily recommend reading if you're going through a particularly tough time. But I think if you're interested in the human condition, you really like to understand kind of human psychology and why we do the things that we do, this is definitely a book that I recommend reading. I've read a few of his other books. I will do another video, maybe doing a review of those as well, because they are, you know, just as impactful in my opinion, but in different ways. But this is the one that he's like really, really known for. So definitely check out the book. It's incredible. Read it, I think, at a time where you're kind of ready to read something this heavy. And yeah, go into it with an open mind, because it is truly, truly heartbreaking. I think if you've ever felt, you know, disconnected or haunted by your own mind, this will stay with you. It's really painful, very beautifully written, and it is completely unforgettable. It is a book that I still think about. Let me know down below in the comments if you have read it. I've not actually met anyone who's read this book, so let me know down below in the comments if you have read it. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were. And if you have any questions, particularly around like trigger warnings, do let me know and I'll be happy to help out. So I'll see you down below in the comments, folks. Thanks for watching as always. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in my next one. Thanks for watching.